I've been using a little bit of EFT, which is also known as tapping, in some of my sessions recently. And I had a great conversation that came up with one of my clients around how to and when to apply that skill versus when and how to recognize that something else is necessary. Um, and that tapping is not going to be the most effective thing to use. So, first off, EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and a lot of people know that as tapping. And it's right up my alley, just in terms of really combining that more traditional clinical psychology background and, like ancient, spiritual, soul based kind of Eastern practices. So EFT really combines psychology and acupressure principles to be able to help your nervous system process, release, regulate emotions, right? And come from a activated nervous system sympathetic state into the calm, peaceful parasympathetic state of being. Let me think if we're going to say this. So before I give you an example of what EFT looks like and kind of walk you through that, I just want to cue up a little bit of context and understanding when would you be using that. And it is to process and release emotions. Emotion, the lexicology breakdown of that stands for energy, motion, energy in motion, emotion. Emotions are meant to be experienced and move. There's movement to it, right? Like a wave. We're not meant to, when we start to feel that emotion come up, cling on to it, hold it in place, cause resistance that doesn't allow the movement of the emotion to happen there. And so a lot of times what I notice is that many of us don't have a really accurate and healthy understanding of what it means to process emotions. So people will misuse that word of I'm trying to process this, I'm processing this. And what is really happening is they're ruminating, dwelling, over analyzing. And that is not emotional processing. It's very different from actually processing emotion. And so EFT is a way of helping you to lean into and start feeling the difference between what it means to ruminate or overanalyze about a stressor or problem, or the kind of questions and details around the emotional experience, and to shift into processing. So once you notice that you're having some kind of an emotional response to something, EFT is going to allow you to identify, label, and allow that emotion to move through your body. So it's really nice that it includes the verbal expression, and that alone has a lot of power, healing energy, healing power, as well as the somatic experiencing of the tapping through the acupressure points. It does a lot of good to bring an integrated ability to process emotions and truly regulate your nervous system activation. So I'm going to dive into giving you a little bit of an example of that. I'm just going to think for a second of what kind of like stressor I want to use for it. And I think I'll just use a kind of more of like a personal thing, because maybe that will be helpful. So let's say I am already having a little bit of like my internal sense of like conflict, and what do I want to do here, and trying to make a decision on something. And then somebody in my life is coming in with some opinions, and I'm not really ready to hold those opinions because I haven't even fully like settled into my own internal compass, and I'd rather be able to lean into that and follow my own internal and divine guidance versus the noise of chatter, other people's opinions, or advice on things that they're a little more removed from and is being really filtered through their own, I want to say, like distortion of the lens of ego that kind of refracts things, and can sometimes actually move you further away from your own whispers of your soul, your own divine guidance. So I'll go with that as a little like example. Like something happens and I feel a little bit like, ooh, that just kicked up some anxiety, and I'm feeling my heart beating a little bit fast, and now I'm getting into this place where I could easily dip into more rumination on it and be like, okay, are they right? Is this right? Am I wrong? What's going on? What pathway do I want to take? That is not processing. That's not emotional processing. That would be, like I said, dipping into rumination. So, what I'm going to do when I notice that that is happening is notice that it's happening. Ooh, I can feel myself getting escalated. I can feel the symptoms of that nervous system activation. My mind is getting a little bit clouded, a little bit of perseverating. My heart's beating a little fast, right? And here's where we use the EFT. You're going to use statements, and I'll start with the first statement that I start with. You can just apply that and use the same one all the way through when you're learning. It's easier to do it that way. But I now will, you'll see a flow where from what I say as my starter statement when I'm at the first tapping point, it'll move through and morph a little bit. And I'm doing that out of a place of just being connected with intuition and finding a flow state to it. So learn it and practice it with one primary statement that you use through the whole way, just to make it easier for yourself. And once you get really used to doing that and it becomes more habitual, then you can find that intuitive flow with it and let come out what's going to come out. And then you'll see that it can kind of morph and connect you further with your own internal compass. I'll say it that way. So I'll start and just give you an example of what this looks like. Even though I feel anxious and self doubting, I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I feel anxious and self doubting, I deeply and completely accept myself. I feel anxious and self doubting, and I accept myself. I'm present with the stress as I allow it to rise and fall. As I continue tapping, my nervous system releases this energy, and I return to a state of increased calm, centeredness, and peace. When I drop out of my head and down into my heart, I can hear the whispers of my soul and the divine guidance. I'm surrounded by a sea of angels that are always there, whispering divine guidance, support, and protection. So with that, you can see how it shifted from the statement that I said at the very starting point to the end. And I'm just using my own like heart-centered, intuitive flow on what I'm saying and how I'm processing. But like I said, you can use one statement, which is that even though I feel blank, I deeply and completely accept myself. And you can say that statement on each of the tapping points. And I'll include a picture or a link or both below that gives a little diagram of each of those tapping points to help you. So you can look at that as you're going through that for yourself until you start to memorize them. So you go through one time on each of those tapping points with that starter statement, which is identifying and sitting with some acceptance and flow of the emotion. And then you do a second time through with a reframe. And so what I mean by a reframe is you're going to choose some kind of like some kind of resonating affirmation that's just like a simple one-lining statement. And I'm just thinking for a second of what I want to use there. I'll just give you one example of like a simple little statement that I would use to go back through afterward. I always have access to my own internal compass, and I am divinely guided, supported, and protective. I always have my internal compass, and I am divinely guided. I am divinely guided and protected. I'm divinely guided. I am divinely guided and protected. I am divinely guided and supported. I'm divinely guided. I am divinely guided. I always have access to this divine guidance and protection. So now that I've given you a little introduction and modeling for the tapping, I want to lean into a conversation that I had with one of my clients that I thought was really helpful, um, in regard to how and when to apply this technique in her life and when something else is called for. So, um, some little examples are around noticing our survival skills and trauma symptoms. And it doesn't need to be to that level if you don't feel like you have a trauma history, right? Just noticing when you are having an emotional response that might be a little bit disturbing or disproportionate to the situation, and you need to tend to your emotions. An example of that would be when I get in my car, as soon as I turn over the ignition, I'm noticing anxiety. And so then we're doing the tapping through before you actually start to drive, which is, even though I feel nervous and afraid, I deeply and completely love and accept myself going through. And then adding a reframe to that. I trust myself, I'm safe within myself. I'm okay with myself, whatever that might be. So there's one example of when to use that. And then there's another time where we're talking about um, a little bit of OCD type of symptoms with wanting external environment to be organized in such a way to try to manage our internal chaos. And so this example is somebody is getting out some like condiments and supplies to make a sandwich. And the minute they're getting that stuff out and it's like spread across the counter, this person is noticing this agitation rising, and this urge of wanting to go over and put everything back away. And obviously in that scenario, that's not appropriate behavior to swoop in and take away someone's supplies when they're trying to make themselves a sandwich. And so there's recognition of like, okay, I am, that's not a behavior I want to engage in, and yet I am having this kind of like disproportionate emotional disturbance. There's where you can use that tapping. Even though I feel stressed about this mess, I deeply and completely love and accept myself, right? And do the full run through with a reframe on it to be able to attend to the emotion, um, so that you don't feel like you need to jump into the dysfunctional behavior of managing the trigger rather than attending to the emotional response. So hopefully those give you some pretty decent examples of when to use this. And then I'm going to follow it up with give you an example of something else. So she asked this question afterward, or kind of explained, like, we started with one thing in session one with the introduction of the tapping, and here's where we can apply it to this situation, and came up in session with the language to use for both the first and second run through. And then, the person has just been doing a great job with working with me on expanding that and figuring out, hey, I thought about this. Can I use this here? How do I apply it here? And really going through the coaching of how to do that. And so then the next question is, she's describing this scenario of, I'm thinking of how I want to use the language just to like shift and make sure that I'm feeling I'm protecting anonymity completely with the situation. I'm just going to go with like a simple kind of hanging your coat up or something like that when you get home from work kind of scenario here. So she is saying along these same lines, in connection to like the making a sandwich type of an example. Um, Something that my partner does is uh, leave jackets on the kitchen table or whatnot. And this is something that I've addressed and said, hey, it bothers me. Do you mind hanging the jacket up when you come back in from being outside? And and he will not do it. and and so she says, so I've accepted that he will not do that, and I want to know, can you help me build out a script to use EFT for that situation? What should I be saying for my first and second run through, right? And here is where there's something else that needs to be addressed. And so we had this conversation to expand and look in all the dark corners of this situation and shed some light on everything that's happening before trying to band-aid it with using tapping. And I don't say that to minimize tapping. It's a wonderful thing to do. But you want to use it in the appropriate context instead of masking something that needs to be surfaced and brought to the light. So as we're going through this conversation, we're just recognizing the difference between using a skill like this to promote nurturing, responding, holding space for, and processing your emotions in general, and also related to, you know, mm, like trauma symptoms, something that is rising from the past that feels like disproportionate. What we don't want to do is dismiss ourselves, diminish our right to make reasonable requests, our, disenfranchise ourselves in our interpersonal relationships. And I say that in terms of obviously empowering my client and helping people to step into a place of being really good at attending to our own truths, expressing those, living in alignment. Because if you are not doing that, if you are suppressing things that are screaming to be addressed, sometimes, not sometimes, emotions are there to teach us something. And there's such a thing as having some rightful irritation and anger. And I think this kind of dovetails back into the last video that I did talking about women and the ability to hold space for our own emotions. And when we feel like something in relationship to another person is in direct conflict, that's what needs to be dropped to hold on to more of our own stuff and bring that to the table, because that is your responsibility. The thing you're dropping is not meaning you're negligent, is not meaning you're not a beautiful, loving, empathic person. It means you are rightfully handing that thing back to the person who is meant to be holding on to it. And there is a deep sense of honoring, respect, and reciprocity in doing that. This is not anything promoting being harsh to the other person, to the clients in the relationship. It is a gift to hand that back over and solely hold on to your own your own things in a more respectful and self-honoring way. And what you're saying when you hand back the other person responsibility for the other person's emotional state and behaviors and accountability, is you're saying, hey, this is yours, and I respect you enough to know that you got it, that you can hold yours, right? That you can show up for yourself, that I don't need to hold on to yours, and holding on to my own is enough. And this creates more of a, I want to say, dignified relationship functioning in integrity and, like I said, reciprocity. And so now you're holding space for your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and allowing your partner to fully step in to the role that you want them to be in. Let's not block them from that and not let them have the capacity to have the space they need to walk toward us and show up in the way that you deserve. And you do that by pulling into yourself and being self honoring. So ultimately, what we're getting around to in this conversation is some Socratic questioning and this kind of looking at the situation in a more full perspective, and asking her with that Socratic questioning, asking her, tell me about a time when your husband had asked you to, had actually, I think she might have just offered this up without me like having to reach for it. She gave some kind of example of when my partner my partner told me like 15 years ago that it bothered him when I put my shoes here instead of here, like, pet peeve type of thing. And I said, and tell me more about that. How did you handle that? I never put my shoes there again. From the minute he asked me, I always put my shoes exactly where he asked me to, and I'm very considerate and thoughtful of that. Okay, so you are more than capable, and you've showed up and you've honored that request. Yes. And yet you have such hesitancy to approach that subject with him. And she had originally, but once she felt like, okay, I said it once and then he just continues to do that repeatedly, it was now, okay, now I guess I've tried, I lost that battle, I'll like surrender, I'll accept it, I'll stuff it, I'll shove it down, and I'll just tap it away. No, that is a place where we need to help you rise up more into self honoring behavior and continuing conversations. Because now, not only do you have an issue with it is irritating me, this pet peeve kind of thing, but this is a whole other issue. It's not even about the coat at this point. This is about, I don't feel that you have enough love, respect, and consideration to want to shift a small behavior in order to show up for me when I do that for you in so many different ways repeatedly. So we had a beautiful conversation about this, and she really seemed to connect with that and say like, yeah, you're right, it is reasonable for me to expect to be treated in a more similar fashion to the level of consideration and love and respect that I am putting out there, which is pretty expansive. So I hope that is helpful to be able to uh, see kind of the difference between what's reasonable to expect of ourselves and what's reasonable for us to expect out of a coping skill or like a regulation technique. There's beauty to everything, and there's a time and place for all of it. Um, And yet, we also, when you go into therapy, you should not be expecting to leave solely with mastering three coping skills, right? You should be unraveling and I want to say like eradicating, but like finding ways to move in a manner that the healing that happens when you come further, closer and closer into alignment with yourself, and you step into living in such a way that is so self-honoring, and it's all comes back to like relationship to self, really mirrored in so many different avenues of our lives and our relationships. But when you get to that spot, there's a dissolving of these entanglements so that you don't have to have so many skills to untie knots, right? I'll teach you a couple skills to untie knots so that you know you have that in your back pocket. But that is symptom management. That is not a deep healing. And the deep healing, like I said, comes back around to the depths of relationship to self and how do we bring our soul closer to smooth integration. What's another word for that? Like a symphony, like this harmonious symphony of your soul embodiment and living into that in the way you speak, in the way you move, in your behaviors, in the way you hold space for yourself. And that all, like I said, can and does reflect back to us in our external environment.